Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. It was a regular day in the village of Konoha with all of its citizens going about their business, but today was anything but normal for a select few. In the back of their classroom at their regular table we find a 12-year-old Kalina and Makari and an 11-year-old Naruto. All three of them along with the rest of the class were listening to what would be a fascinating lecture on the history of the village had they not heard it over 50 Tim. However, the trio of young nin sitting at the back of the classroom were antsy and wanting to leave. Alright you lot, you're dismissed, but remember your homework assignments are due tomorrow, declared Iruka. Kalina, Makari and Naruto quickly jumped out of the window next to them and quickly ended to the ground below them and quickly ran over to two people standing away from a crowd of others. She hasn't come out yet, you lot, calm down, said Juden as he saw his daughter's closest friends run up to him and his wife. I hope she passed, said Kalina. This is Tenten we're talking about, no way she didn't pass, declared Naruto with the utmost faith in his Nei-chan. Despite what he said, he was still a little nervous. The five people waited a few moments for Tenten to exit the building. They watched and waited. After about 5 minutes, Tenten walked out of the academy building with a grin plastered on her face and a blue-clothed headband tied around her forehead. She quickly walked over to her friends and parents. Good job, Tenten, said Miliana smiling at her daughter. Thanks, Ka-chan, said Tenten grinning at her mother. I knew you could do it, kiddo, said Juden with a smile towards his daughter. Thanks to San, said Tenten hugging the man who hugged his daughter back. Good on ya, Tenten, said Kalina with a grin and a thumbs up. Tenten smiled at her friend. Congrats, Tenten, declared Makari with a smile, getting a nod from the girl in question. Great work, Nei-chan, said Naruto hugging his older sister. The six people walked out of the academy before heading towards a local sushi restaurant, all with smiles upon their faces. Hashtag at the sushi restaurant hash. The six of them walked into the restaurant all with grins on their faces. They were greeted by a waiter. Hello, welcome to Sushi Garden, a table for 5? Questioned the man looking at the group. No, a table for 6, said Juden looking at the man with a dangerous look in his eye. I'm sorry sir, but we do not serve his kind, said the man pointing to Naruto. Juden was about to yell at the man when aha! ND landed on his arm. It's okay, Juden Oji-san, I had other things I need to do soon, said Naruto before turning and walking out of the building. Now that thing is gone, right, this UGHA, spoke the man only for him to be punched in the gut by Juden. We will be taking our business elsewhere, declared the angry weaponsmith. How dare they do that to Kushi-chan's child, thought the man as he stormed out of the building, quickly followed by his wife, daughter and his daughter's two friends. Ka-chan, spoke Tenten walking up beside her mother. Yes, Ten-chan, asked the woman, only half paying attention to her daughter and half trying to calm her husband down. What did he mean by Naruto's kind? Asked the confused girl. I can't say, Ten-chan, but all that matters is that man was a bigot. Naruto is no different from you or me, said the woman. Hashtag with Naruto hash. As soon as the blonde stepped out of sight of the doors of the restaurant, he bolted away towards his regular training ground. Naruto stood in the training grounds. He quickly made a single hand sign. Waroke number jutsu, sexy jutsu, called Naruto as his form morphed to that of Narumi, who quickly flicked her arms out to the side where a pair of Tessin slid into her awaiting hands. Ing hell! Screamed the girl as she flicked the small fans with all of her might, sending out a shockwave of futon chakra that flew towards and neatly sliced a tree as Narumi let out some of her anger. Futon Kazakiri no Jutsu, wind-style wind cutter jutsu, called Narumi, flicking her fans violently once more. After the jutsu had done its damage, the red-haired woman released her Waroke no Jutsu and was once more replaced with Naruto. Dance in the darkest shadows and mark them as your playthings, Aga, chanted Naruto as he held his hand above his shadow where the blade in question slowly arose from. Once Naruto grasped the hilt of his katana, he ran forwards, the shadows around him flaring to match his anger, as Naruto cut clean th. Rough a 3-foot diameter tree trunk, the flaring shadows shot up and into the now log before exploding outwards in a shower of splinters. Naruto charged at another tree as tears began to build up on his face. Why does everyone hate me? Questioned the blonde to himself as he sliced through another tree. Meanwhile, a few hundred meters behind him stood Yugao, who watched in sadness as her student tore through the forest. She didn't know exactly what happened, but from what she saw pieced together what happened. He has to learn soon or this could become a major problem, thought Yugao as a sad look spread across her face, before she quickly created a shadow clone which she sent off to the Hokage. Hokage's office. Hiruzen sat in his office with paperwork spread out over the desk as he glared down at the unholy paper. His left hand twitched, going to make a hand sign to burn the blasted paper when a knock at his door interrupted him. Yes? Questioned the cage. Yugao opened the door and stepped inside. Yugao, what can I do for you this afternoon? Questioned the elderly cage. I think it's time Naruto learned about his burden, said Yugao firmly. No, came the reply of the Hokage. He's not emotionally strong enough to handle the news, said Hiruzen. Not emotionally strong enough? Hokage-sama, look at him through your crystal ball right now. Look at the little boy who is doubting his own humanity. Watch him right now and tell me he doesn't deserve to know about the fox, snapped Yugao. Hiruzen felt she was overreacting but did as requested and pulled out his crystal ball and looked in on Naruto, who was kneeling on the forest floor of his regular training ground leaning on his katana, which was blade first in the dirt, and tears were rolling down his cheeks. You tell me that he doesn't need to know why the villagers call him a demon. Even if they are wrong, there is only so long he can believe us that he's not before he becomes the very thing the villagers fear, said Yugao, glaring at her leader, knowing she was in the right and had ided to herself. Even if Hiruzen still said no, she would tell Naruto he was well beyond the point of needing to know. All right, Yugao, bring him here. I should be the one to break the news to him, said Hiruzen. Yugao nodded and dissipated in a plume of smoke as Hiruzen looked down at his adoptive grandson. Oh Naruto, just how badly have I screwed up with you? Questioned the elderly Sarutobi. Back with Naruto and Yugao. Yugao had just received the memories from her clone and she walked forwards to the crying blonde. She quickly engulfed the now shaking blonde in a hug. Yugao-sensei, why do they hate me? Questioned the blonde, having sensed her chakra approaching him earlier. It's okay Naruto-kun, you're not a demon, said Yugao, pulling the shaking blonde closer to her. But why do they call me that? Questioned Naruto, turning to face his sensei with tear-stained cheeks. Come with me Naruto-kun, the Hokage has agreed to shed light on the situation, declared Yugao. Naruto nodded and let Eiga fall into the shadows from whence it came. The blonde and purple net walked from their training ground to the Hokage tower in silence. Yugao was hoping she hadn't lost the blonde's trust for not telling him about his burden. Naruto was just trying to ignore the looks he was getting. Once the two of them made it to the tower, they both quickly walked up the stairs to the Hokage's office. Naruto, Yugao, good, close the door, said Hiruzen as the two of them walked in. Naruto sat down in front of the elderly cage. Naruto, look at me, said Hiruzen, drawing the blonde's attention to him. You are not a demon, okay, you are as human as Yugao or I, said Hiruzen. Then why do they call me one Gigi? Asked Naruto, pleading with the man to share what he knew. Ignorance, my boy, ignorance. They believe you are the Kyuubi in human form, Naruto, said Hiruzen. Why? Because I was born on the day of the attack? Questioned the blonde angrily. No Naruto, not because you were born on the day of the attack, said Hiruzen, sighing. There really was no way to break this. Gently to the boy. Naruto, the Kyuubi is not dead, said Hiruzen, shocking the boy, but the gears in his head quickly began turning. The Kyuubi is sealed in me, isn't it? Questioned Naruto, surprising Hiruzen at the boy's quick deduction. Just like his father, thought the elderly cage fondly. Yes Naruto, the Yondaime sealed the Kyuubi into you, and it was because you were born on the day of the attack that you were selected. There were no other infants born that day, and anything other than undeveloped chakra coils rarely cope with so Much chakra being added to them. It was the last wish of the Yondaime that you were to be seen as a hero, but the civilians in their infinite ignorance saw to it that you were treated as if you were the demon itself, said Hiruzen. Naruto sat there with his head down for a moment. I thank you for finally telling me this, Gigi, even if I wish it had been much sooner, said Naruto, standing up from his chair. I will, however, need some time to think on this, and until then I'm going to get some training done, said Naruto as he turned around and walked to the door. Do you want me there, Naruto-kun, or do you need some time to clear your head? Asked Yugao. I'd prefer to have your company and guidance, Yugao-sensei, said Naruto with a smile as the woman nodded and the two of them walked out of the door and back to the training ground. Hashtag training ground. 5 minutes later. Naruto stood in the middle of the training ground facing his sensei. Yugao-sensei, before we begin I need your help with something, said Naruto. What do you need, Naruto? Asked Yugao. Well, Tenten ne taught me Kalina and Makari the Bunshin no Jutsu, clone jutsu, a few weeks ago, and for the life of me I can't seem to get it right, said Naruto looking at his sensei. Show me, said Yugao. Naruto nodded and flipped through the required hand signs. Bunshin number jutsu, called Naruto, and with a poof of very sickly pale and almost dead-looking Naruto appeared beside him. Naruto looked up to his sensei as the clone poofed away. Well, it's a simple matter of too much chakra, try putting less in, said Yugao. That's the thing, sensei, I'm putting as little as I can into the jutsu, said Naruto with a frown. Well, you could try and make more clones, suggested Yugao. Naruto shook his head. Even with the amount of chakra I'm putting in when I try to make hundreds of clones they still look the same, said Naruto with an angry look on his face. Well, I see no other option, we need to teach you a more chakra-intensive clone jutsu, said Yugao. What did you have in mind, sensei? Asked Naruto. The Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, declared Yugao. Naruto sat in the back of the academy classroom with Makari to his right and Kalina to her right. The three of them, like the rest of their class, were excited. Today was their graduation exam, they were simply waiting for Iruka and Mizuki to show up. Naruto was simply looking out the window, while Makari and Kalina smiled and laughed with each other. Alright everyone, quiet down, we have a test to begin, declared Iruka as he and Mizuki walked into the room, Mizuki carrying a stack of papers. Alright, just as a reminder, while Mizuki hands out the tests, today we have a written test, then kunai and shuriken accuracy, taijutsu, and then ninjutsu, said Iruka. Naruto took the test Mizuki handed him and placed it face down on the desk as he was supposed to. Alright everyone, you may turn over and begin, said Iruka. Naruto flipped over his test and noted that the questions didn't look quite right. The ink on the paper looked like it was slightly smudged, and at the same time the questions looked a little hard for a genin test. Naruto channeled a tiny amount of chakra to his eyes, just enough to activate his Sharingan, just not enough for anyone to sense his chakra fluctuating, or at least that was the goal. Naruto wasn't sure if someone caught his use of chakra. All he knew was he spotted a genjutsu on his test with his Sharingan, which promptly broke the illusion and revealed the real test to Naruto, who discreetly sent a sideways glance at Makari's test, which had no genjutsu on it. Naruto shrugged it off and began his test, not noticing the pair of green eyes glaring at him. Hashtag about an hour later. Okay everyone, pencils down. Test time's up, said Iruka, drawing the attention of the potential genin to him as they all put their pencils down. Alright everyone, outside to the kunai and shuriken range and pass me your tests as you go out, said Iruka, standing up. All of the Nin got up and walked down and out past Iruka. Naruto, Kalina and Makari were the last three people to walk down with their tests in hand. Handing them to Iruka, the four of them walked out into the academy grounds. They then walked over to the large group of genin. Alright you lot, listen up, because I'm only saying this once, declared Iruka, gaining the attention of the genin. You will each be given 5 kunai and 5 shuriken. You will be awarded 10 points for a bullseye, 9 points for the second ring, 8 for the third, and so on until 1 for the 10th. Ring out, declared Iruka. First up we have Shino Aburame, said Iruka. Hashtag about an hour later. Alright, next up we have Naruto, said Iruka looking down at his clipboard. In the past hour Kalina had got 41 and 44, Kalina had 45 and 46 and the rest of the class had range D from 50 and 49, which was Sasuke to 18 and 15 scored by civilian-born students and the fangirls. Naruto walked up to the line where he was given his kunai. Naruto quickly tested their weight, finding to his satisfaction they were the right weight and balanced correctly too. Naruto quickly flicked the bladed weapon towards the target and just like he had planned it hit the third ring out from the center. He then threw two more hitting directly next to the first one in the third ring out, then the other two hit directly center of the second ring out. The blonde was given the 5 shuriken with which he scored the reverse score, 3 in the second ring and 2 in the third. He, like Makari and Kalina, were holding back for the exams. They weren't holding back all that much, just enough that they didn't rob Sasuke of his Rookie of the Year title because they really didn't want to deal with the bitching the Uchiha would undoubtedly start if he wasn't named Rookie of the Year. Good job Naruto. 37 and 38, said Iruka. Naruto nodded and walked back to his two friends, where he stood for the last 5 minutes while the last of the class took their turns. Throw the weapons. Once everyone had finished, Iruka spoke up once more. Alright, you lot, we're taking an hour break at this point so I can mark your tests, so off you go and meet me at the taijutsu rings in an hour, said Iruka as the genin split into their social groups and went off on their own. Naruto, Makari and Kalina all walked over to the sparring circles to spar while they waited. Just under an hour later. The hour was up and the genin hopefuls from Iruka's class along with the Chunin himself made their way over to the taijutsu circles, only to be met with a surprising sight they saw. Makari with a bow in hand and a quiver of arrows on her back, sparring against a red-headed swordswoman with a pitch-black katana that looked quite demonic with the 6 back spikes, upturned guard and kunai-like bladed bottom spike. Who's the hot redhead? Questioned Kiba as he spotted the sparring girls. I got no idea, but she's good, said Choji as he watched the two girls lock weapons, Makari's bow being like a staff against the pitch-black katana. Have you forgotten about the shadows, Makari-chan? Questioned the redhead in a sing-song voice as the shadows at their feet rose up like flames around them. Some of the students turned back to Shikamaru to see if he had any idea what was going on, only to see him studying the spar quite intently. Of course not, Narumi-chan, said Makari as she leapt up and back out of the shadow circle before pulling 3 arrows out of her quiver and shooting them at Narumi within the blink of an eye. As they hit the ground they went off, sending out 3 flashes of light, and before anyone could recover, Mikar. I had a kunai at Narumi's neck. I win this time, Narumi-chan, said Makari sweetly. Narumi and anyone else who didn't look away from the flashes the arrows set off blinked as they saw the weapon at the girl's throat. Narumi nodded and the weapon was moved away. Good spar, Makari-chan, said Narumi with a smile. That makes what, 30 to 28 your way? Questioned Makari, getting a nod from Narumi, who dispelled her jutsu, and there stood Naruto. All of the genin hopefuls, particularly the girls, stood there gawking at Naruto. Alright everyone, let's get these spars going, said Iruka, snapping everyone out of their stupor. Anyone want to go first? Asked Iruka. I will, said Kalina, stepping up to the sparring circle that Mizuki stepped into opposite the girl. Okay, the rules are simple. You may only use taijutsu. You must last at least 5 minutes against Mizuki or land several solid hits on him, said Iruka. The potential genin nodded. About an hour and a half later. Well done, Sasuke. Now last but least, Naruto, you're up, said Iruka. Naruto nodded and stepped into the ring. Naruto walked to his position opposite Mizuki. Begin, called Iruka, standing between the two of them. Naruto stood there in a stance that made Sasuke seethe. It was the Uchiha interpreter fist. Naruto stood there for a moment studying Mizuki, before giving the mana, come here, motion. Mizuki ran at Naruto, throwing a fist forwards at the blonde, who even without his Sharingan could clearly see Mizuki's attack coming. The blonde dropped low, avoiding the punches before throwing his own towards Mizuki, who jumped back, avoiding. Naruto pushed forwards into a left hook straight at Mizuki's jaw. The man slapped the fist, Naruto planted his left foot and spun around and kicked Mizuki with the heel of his right foot, knocking Mizuki forwards just enough that Naruto could plant both feet on the ground and wrapping his left arm around Mizuki's neck, keeping him in a headlock, and before the Chunin could do anything, Naruto punched him in the face and kneed him in the chest, knocking the man unconscious, dropping the man unceremoniously on the ground before 2 RNING to Iruka. Well done, Naruto, but don't let this victory over a Chunin go to your head. Remember, Mizuki was holding back for the purposes of the test, said Iruka. Naruto nodded. However, he could see that Mizuki had been holding back less, if not at all, when he was fighting Naruto, but the boy Zhu T went along with it. He walked back to his friends while Iruka woke Mizuki up to continue the test. Hashtag 10 minutes later hash. Once Iruka woke Mizuki up, they all headed back into the classroom, where once inside they all once more took their seats for their last set of instructions. Alright everyone, for this last part of the test you will individually be called into the next room. You will have to perform a Bunshin no Jutsu, Clone Jutsu, the Henge no Jutsu, Transformation Jutsu, and a Kawarimi no Jutsu, Substitution Jutsu. However, if you wish you will be allowed to perform one more Jutsu, said Iruka, standing in front of everyone. They all nodded. Shino, you're once again first, said Iruka, walking out of the room, the cloaked Aburame following closely behind. Hashtag about an hour and a half later hash. Most of the class had gone into the other room and everyone had returned with a grin and a headband. Several had gone in and returned in under a minute, while others were gone for up to 5 and now. Naruto, you're up, said Iruka, sticking his head through the door. Good luck, Naruto, said Makari as Naruto stood up. Knock him dead, Naruto, said Kalina with a smirk. Naruto nodded to both of his friends before walking down and out of the room, before walking into the next room where he saw Mizuki and Iruka sitting at a table. Alright Naruto, let's start with the henge, declared Iruka, knowing full well how well the boy would do this. To no one's surprise, Naruto put up half a hand sign and in a poof he was replaced with Narumi. Wow, there's a surprise, a perfect henge, said Iruka sarcastically as he wrote down the score on the clipboard in his hand. Narumi then switched back and there stood Naruto once more. Alright, next up go the Kawarimi, said Iruka, and again to no one's surprise Naruto just vanished, replaced with a AF that fluttered to the ground. Nothing else, no smoke and no pop sound, just gone, replaced with a leaf. Iruka once more noted down the result, and when he looked back up, Naruto was back. Alright Naruto, Bunshin, said Iruka. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, quietly said Naruto, creating a hand sign, and in a plume of smoke 7 more Narutos appeared next to the boy. Well done, Naruto, said Iruka, slightly surprised the boy could make that many clones. The Chunin then noted down a score on his clipboard. Would you like to perform another jutsu, Naruto? Questioned Iruka. Naruto edged his head to the side for a moment before nodding and biting his thumb, confusing Iruka and Mizuki for a moment until the masked blonde ran the bloodied digit along the tattoo on his left arm. Kuchio's no Jutsu, summoning jutsu, called Naruto, slamming his hand on the ground where a plume of smoke erupted. Once it cleared, there sat Razor. Naruto ni, declared the razorback cub as he ran up to Naruto, who smiled and petted the creature. He then looked up at Iruka, who nodded and noted WN something on his clipboard. Well done, Naruto, you pass, said Iruka, holding out a black-clothed headband. Naruto quickly picked up the razorback and placed the creature on his head before grabbing his headband and walking back to the classroom. Once the blonde was back in the room and walking back up to his seat, he heard a growl from his left. Naruto turned to see Kiba sitting at the desk with Akamaru growling at Naruto, or more precisely the Grimm on Naruto's head. Don't even try, Akamaru, said Naruto. Why shouldn't he try, cat boy? Growled Kiba. You wanna let him know skin off my nose, but don't come crying to me when Akamaru is ripped to shreds. Not even wolves can stand in comparison to razorbacks, declared Naruto as he walked off with the feline Grimm still sitting atop his head. Naruto stood in front of Mizuki. The two of them stood in a clearing just outside the gates of Konoha, having followed the man from the Hokage Tower after he observed Mizuki sneaking around with a scroll on his back. For the crime of treason by stealing the forbidden scroll, you Chunin Mizuki are sentenced to death, declared Naruto. Ha, what's a genin like you going to do to me, a Chunin? Questioned Mizuki arrogantly. Warok number jutsu, sexy jutsu, called Naruto, who was bathed in smoke, and once it cleared there stood Narumi glaring at Mizuki. Really, you used that stupid transformation technique? Questioned Mizuki, raising an eyebrow at the transformed boy. Narumi simply flicked her hands out to the side, letting her tesson slide into her fingers, and with a flick they were unfurled. Narumi flicked her wrists while sending futon chakra to her hands, sending out a wave of futon chakra out of both of her fans straight towards Mizuki. The two waves formed one X-shaped wave that flew twice as fast towards the Chunin, who quickly jumped out of the way of the incoming attack. You little shit, growled Mizuki, pulling a Fuma shuriken off his back before throwing the giant metal star towards Narumi, who quickly kawarimi ed with a leaf L. Edding the steel star stick straight into the ground. Damn it, where'd that little bastard get to? Muttered Mizuki, looking around. That was when a wave of futon chakra knocked him out of the tree and onto the ground, but before Narumi could follow up on her attack, Mizuki flipped backwards, getting out of the girl's taijutsu range. You're no match for me, you little demon, said Mizuki arrogantly. Narumi charged forwards, diving into a slicing motion across Mizuki's neck with her iron-edged fan. Mizuki leaned back, avoiding his neck being slit, only for Narumi's second fan to come in at his face. Folded up and smacked him in the face. This slap caused Mizuki to falter for a second, but it was enough for Narumi to flip into a handstand split kick, kicking Mizuki in the face, breaking his nose, causing the man to stumble back. You bastard, you broke my nose, growled Mizuki, clutching his broken nose. Narumi pushed off of the ground and landed about 20 meters away from Mizuki, only to lop her folded up fan straight at the man's jugular. The silver-haired Chunin slapped the weapon away, however in his rage he failed to notice that Narumi had followed her thrown weapon, and as it registered that Narumi was in front of him, it was already too late, and Narumi's open fan glided across the flesh of Mizuki's neck, leaving a scarlet line behind, and with that Mizuki dropped to the ground and died in an ever-growing pool of his own blood. The redhead then realized what she did and looked at her hands as Mizuki's blood dropped onto her hands from her fan, and then the girl dropped to her knees. I white a man, muttered Narumi as she looked at the blood on her hands and began to shake. Narumi-chan, called a voice from behind the kneeling girl. Narumi slowly turned her head to see Yugao out of the corner of her eye. It was then that the purple-haired Anbu noticed the young redhead was shaking and there was blood and tears on her face. Yugao's eyes locked on the downed body of Mizuki. And then she put two and two together. Narumi-chan, it's okay, you did what you had to, said Yugao, stepping forwards only to stop as a red blur shot to her and latched onto her. BBBB, but Yugao SSS sensei, I wide him, sobbed Narumi, clutching onto her sensei. And if you didn't, he would have you, not to mention got away with the forbidden scroll, said Yugao reassuringly, rubbing circles in her student's back. For the next few moments neither one moved. Narumi just knelt there crying on Yugao's shoulder, but after a few moments the red-haired nin recovered enough that she stood back from her sensei and a smile graced her features. Thanks Yugao sensei, said Narumi. Anytime Narumi-chan, said Yugao with a smile. Narumi then quickly collected her tesson and let them fall into the hidden places in her sleeves before releasing the jutsu, leaving Naruto in her place. We should get this back to Hokage-sama, said Naruto, picking up the scroll which he slung over his shoulder. Yugao nodded and she picked up Mizuki's body because she, like everyone else who had been informed of the scroll's theft, were told to bring back the thief alive or dead. The two quickly left the clearing. Hokage's office. Hiruzen sat in his office. He had just seen Yugao and Naruto and now waited for them to return before he could get back to forming the genin teams. He had sent a few Anbu out to tell those hunting the scroll thief that it had been recovered, and at the Jonin, wishing to be sensei, were to return to the Hokage's office in an hour. It took all of 5 minutes for the Anbu and the genin to walk into his office with the scroll of sealing and the body of the traitor. I believe this is yours, Gigi, said Naruto, handing the man the scroll. I thank you for its recovery Naruto. You will be given the equivalent of AB rank mission pay for the apprehension of a traitor and the return of the scroll of seals, said Hiruzen with a smile as Naruto handed him the scroll. Once the aged Kage had the scroll he smiled to Naruto. Now off you go Naruto, you need your sleep, you have a big day tomorrow, said Hiruzen. Naruto nodded before leaving. Bye Gigi, Yugao-sensei, said Naruto as he walked out of the room. Once he was gone Hiruzen turned to Yugao with a serious look on his aged face. Report, ordered the aged Kage. After we were dispatched I sensed fighting in the outer forests. Upon following the chakra flares I came across Genin Narumi Uzumaki on the ground crying with Chunin Mizuki face down in a pool of his own blood. From what I gathered from my interactions with Narumi, Naruto saw Mizuki with the scroll as he left the tower, and understanding the importance of the scroll followed after Mizuki. However, once he caught up to him a fight broke out between the two of them where Naruto, using the Oi Roke no Jutsu, transformed into Narumi and fought Mizukiing him with her two Tessen. That was all I was able to deduce from what I saw when I arrived moments after the fight ended, declared Yugao in a professional tone. Thank you Anbu Neko dismissed, said Hiruzen, and with that Yugao vanished in a swirl of leaves. An hour later Hiruzen sat in his chair while breathing in smoke from his pipe. In front of him stood several of his best jonin, Kakashi, who was surprisingly on time for once, Kurenai, Asuma, Anko, Hayate, Genma and several others. Hiruzen blew out a puff of smoke as he observed them all. Alright you lot, we all know why we're here, so let's hear it. What teams do you have in mind? Questioned Hiruzen looking at the jonin. I would like to request a team comprised of Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi, said Asuma stepping forwards. Ah, the Ino Shika Cho trio, an excellent choice. Are there any objections to this team? Questioned Hiruzen looking at the gathered jonin. Seeing no raised hands, Hiruzen noted down the team. Next, called Hiruzen. This time Kurenai stepped forwards. I would like to request a team comprised of Shino Aburame, Kiba Inuzuka and Hinata Hyuga, declared the ebony-haired beauty. A tracking team, a splendid idea. Are there any objections to that? Asked Hiruzen again. No one raised their hand in objection, so he noted down the team. Next, said Hiruzen. Kakashi took a step forwards. I request a team of Naruto Uzumaki Uchiha, Sasuke Uchiha and Sakura Haruno, said Kakashi. A heavy-hitting assault team. Interesting. Any objections? Questioned Hiruzen, and to his mild surprise he did have an objection. Yes Anko, what is your objection? Questioned Hiruzen pointing to the purple-haired Kunoichi. As I have been friends with Naruto Uzumaki for several years now, I wish to say there is no way the team would work, said Anko. She then got a gesture from Hiruzen to continue, so she did. Sasuke Uchiha has both a superiority and interiority complex, and the Haruno worships the ground. Sasuke Uchiha walks across, and both of them despise Naruto, and the feeling is mutual. And as one of the highest priority virtues of our village's teams is teamwork, it would be counterproductive to put the three of them together, said Anko. And you have a better idea for a team? Questioned Hiruzen. Well yes, actually I do, said Anko as a smirk spread across her face. The next morning, Academy. Naruto sat in his usual spot in the back of the academy next to Kalina and the window with Makari on the other side of Kalina. It was just about time for the bell to go, signaling the start of the day. All of the class was sitting in the room with everyone talking amongst themselves, excluding Sasuke, who had settled for brooding. Iruka walked into the classroom just as the bell went. Well, good morning to all of you. Today is the day you get assigned your teams, said Iruka as he went into a big lecture about being proud shinobi and kunoichi of Konoha, which he finished in about 20 minutes. Alright everyone, the moment you've all been waiting for, declared Iruka, holding it for a moment to build the suspense. The team assignments. Team 1 will consist of, said Iruka. Naruto, however, zoned out until his name was called. Team 6 will consist of Naruto Uzumaki Uchiha, called Iruka, making Naruto lift his head. Kalina Jigoku, said Iruka. Naruto turned to his teammate with a smile. And Makari Karaikage, declared Iruka. All three of the genin looked at each other and grinned. And your sensei will be Anko Mitarashi, said Iruka, now that made the genin grin even more, and before Iruka could speak further Anko burst through the door. Team 6 with me, let's go, declared Anko in her usual hyperactive nature. Anko, you're early, said Iruka. Don't care, the Gakis and I have places to be, said Anko before giving the come here motion to her team, and with that Makari, Kalina and Naruto ran down the stairs from their seats and out of the room following Anko, who lead them out of the building past Kurenai and several other Jonin in the hallway as they went past. All right, Gaki's Forest of Death, 10 minutes, declared Anko once all of them were outside before she vanished in a swirl of leaves. Naruto turned to his two teammates and nodded, and all three took off running towards the Forest of Death. Several minutes later. The three genin landed at Gate 1 of the Forest of Death, where they all saw Anko kicking back on the top of the gate to the forest. Well done, you lot. 7 minutes, said Anko with a grin as she looked at the team she knew would do well. So what now, Anko-sensei? Questioned Naruto. Well, I'm glad you asked, Naruto. Normally the teams would waste this time getting to know each other, but given we've all known each other long enough, I feel we can just skip that, said Anko. And move on to? Questioned Makari. Well, again, the next step is the true genin test, a test assigned by the sensei to test your skills and your teamwork, but again, I've known you long enough that you three would rather off yourselves than turn on each other, and I know about your little group trainin'. Gee, so I know that you lot have a reasonable amount of skill, so congrats, you pass my test. It's official, we're Team 6, declared Anko. It had been a month since Team 6 had been formed, if in an unorthodox manner, but despite that the four of them had done quite a few mission and done quite a bit of team training. The four ninja were on their way to get their first C-rank mission. Team 6, just who I wanted to see, said Hiruzen as Anko and her team walked into the mission briefing room. What for, Hokage-sama? Asked Anko. A conjoined C-rank mission with teams 8 and 9, said Hiruzen. It was then that Kurenai's team and Tenten's team were in the room looking at them. Hey Tenten ne, Kurenai-chan, said Naruto, waving to the two women who smiled at the boy. What's the mission, Hokage-sama? Questioned Anko, drawing Naruto's attention back to Hiruzen. A merchant caravan has requested protection from bandits and highwaymen into the land of hot water, said Hiruzen, getting a nod from all 12 ninja present, before he tossed Anko a scroll. Anko, you're in charge for the mission, said Hiruzen, getting a nod from the woman as she opened the scroll to scan the contents, while Hiruzen nodded to one of his hidden Anbu, who vanished only to return a moment later with a woman. She had long beautiful red hair tied up into a bun, violet eyes that scanned the room, and she wore an elegant purple kimono with golden swirls spread out on the cloth. I thank you for protecting me and my family, said the woman with a soft smile. Are you ready to depart today, or do you need the day? Asked Anko. We are ready to depart at any time, Ninja-san, declared the woman. All right then, everyone meet at the north gates in an hour and pack for a month, said Anko, getting a nod from the people in the room before the other Jonin vanished in a swirl of leaves for Tenten's sensei, while I vanished in a swirl of rose petals. Naruto followed the Jonin, vanishing in a swirl of wind, water and static, Makari and Kalina both in swirls of leaves. The rest of the ninja just walked out of the room. The blonde one? Questioned the woman, looking to the Hokage, who nodded to the woman. An hour later, North Gates. The client's two red-haired men and the woman they met in the office earlier with their two caravans and one carriage, and all of the ninja minus Naruto, Tenten and Hinata were present. Where's Naruto? Questioned Anko, looking around as she arrived. Not here yet. Neither is Tenten or Hinata, said Kurenai. It was that moment Naruto and Tenten walked up. However, unlike normal, Naruto had two katana strapped to his back in a cross formation. Sorry everyone, 100 katanas take quite a while to seal, said Naruto as he walked up. Everyone but Kurenai, Anko, Kalina, Makari and Tenten went wide-eyed at what he said. Why did you need to seal 100 katanas, and where did you seal them, youthful Naruto-kun? Questioned guy with wide eyes. In this, said Naruto as he pulled the left katana off his back. The three clients eyed the sword interestedly. And as for why it's part of one of my sword styles, said Naruto. Right, said Guy. Hinata walked up and joined her team very quietly, as was normal for her. All right, are we ready to set out? Asked Anko, getting a nod from the 11 ninja under her command for the foreseeable future, but their female client shook her head. I would like one of your ninja to ride with me if that's all right, said the woman. Well, for your safety we could have, spoke Anko interrupted. I would like him to ride with me, said the woman pointing to Naruto. Me? Questioned Naruto, pointing to himself, getting a nod from the woman. Might I ask why you want a genin? If you feel your safety is in jeopardy, we could have one of the jonin ride with you. Questioned Anko, not feeling okay with leaving Naruto alone in the carriage with the woman. He seems like the most interesting company, and I get quite chatty on long journeys like this, said the woman with a small smile on her face. And I am not particularly worried for my safety over my wares. I just would feel more comfortable with a ninja with me, said the woman. Anko nodded. Okay, Naruto, said Anko, turning to the blonde, who nodded and stepped forwards to stand next to the client. Okay, well, we're burning daylight, said Anko with a grin. Nai-chan, you and your team are up the front, Guy, you and your team are in the middle, and Kalina Makari, you two are with me up the back, said Anko with a grin. Naruto and the female client climbed into the carriage while the rest of the convoy began to leave the gates of Konoha. So Naruto-kun, are you from a clan? Asked the woman. Yes, miss, spoke Naruto, realizing he never got her name. Hikari Uzumaki, said the woman while eyeing Naruto closely. Naruto's eyes shot wide at the mention of his clan name, before he calmed himself. Yes, Hikari-san, although I figure you know that, don't you? Said Naruto, getting a nod from the woman. Yes, that is why I requested you specifically for my guard detail, said Hikari. And why not simply tell my team that? Questioned Naruto. For the same reason I envy you and your blonde hair, said Hikari. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Despite the fact our clan is scattered and almost extinct, we still have enemies and people who would gladly kidnap us to use as breeding stock, declared Hikari, making Naruto shudder. He hated the ways she said that. And that is part of the reason I wanted to talk to you. None of my family wants to be ninja, but I have an artifact of the Shodai Uzukage, which should really be in the hands of an Uzumaki ninja, said Hikari before reaching behind her neck and undoing a necklace before she pulled it out of her cloth. The necklace itself was a dark blue rough gemstone on the end of a length of cord. She looked at the necklace once before handing it to Naruto. I couldn't, said Naruto, shaking his head. You can, please, Naruto-kun, said Hikari as she grabbed Naruto's hand and put the necklace into his open hand before closing his fingers around it. While it was never said what the necklace could do, it was linked to Shodai-sama's Arashi Yumer, said Hikari, making Naruto's eyes widen. I trust from that reaction you've heard of the Kekkei Jiniki of Shodai-sama, said Hikari, getting a nod from Naruto. Yes, I have only heard what was supposedly granted by it, and I can find little to no information on the topic in the Uzumaki compound in Konoha, said Naruto. Not surprising, most of the information on the Arashi Yumer was locked in the Uzumaki vaults in Uzu, locked in a room only those with the blue D-line could access, but at the time of the invasion the last of the Arashi Yumer was gone, said Hikari with a sigh. Well, no longer, said Naruto. This time Hikari's eyes went wide as she looked at Naruto. Why you? Stuttered Hikari. Possess the Arashi Yumer? Yes, or at least I am fairly sure I do, said Naruto simply. Channel some chakra into the gem, said Hikari, desperately pointing to the gem in Naruto's hand. Naruto raised an eyebrow but did as instructed, and to his great surprise the gemstone began to glow brightly. Naruto looked at Hikari, who was shocked, but after she got over her initial shock, tears began to form. Oh, Imoto, you did manage to pass on a legacy, said Hikari before she quickly embraced Naruto, who was confused but nonetheless hugged the woman, gently patting her back. AWKW. Ardley. Naruto-kun, I'm your aunt, said Hikari, pulling back from Naruto, whose eyes went wide at the woman. Oh, Oba-san, stuttered Naruto, Getting a nod from the woman who he lunged at and wrapped his arms around her, tears threatening to spill from his own eyes as the two shared an embrace. Once they parted, Naruto's charcoal black eyes locked with his aunt's violet orbs. Oba-san, I know you might not be able to answer this, but do you know how I inherited these? Questioned Naruto, channeling chakra to his eyes, turning them into Sharingan. He figured while he was talking with his aunt, he might as well try and figure out if his Sharingan came from his mother's side or his father's. Hikari's eyes widened, seeing the Sharingan eyes of her nephew. Yes, I can, Naru-chan, you inherited them from your Jiji, mine and Kushi-chan's father, said Hikari. Did my Ka-chan ever activate these eyes? Because I was trained by my mother's teammate for several years and she was shocked when she found out I had Sharingan, said Naruto. Hikari shook her head. Tu-san and Ka-chan sealed our Sharingan. He was scared for our safety and thought if someone found out he had two children that his enemies would come after us to get to him, said Hikari. Who was he? Asked Naruto. Hikari suddenly became nervous. I know you may have heard many things about him, Naruto, but please remember that was before he met your grandmother, said Hikari. Naruto nodded to his aunt. Naruto, your grandfather was Madara Uchiha, said Hikari. Naruto's eyes went wide. Of course he had heard of Madara Uchiha. He was the strongest Uchiha in history, one of the two Uchiha to unite the clan during the Warring States period and one of Konoha's biggest traitors. Before you say anything, yes, I know of his legend, but like I said, he changed when he met Ka-chan, but that was after his showdown with the Shodai Hokage where he almost dies but was saved by Ka-chan, said Hikari. Naruto was still skeptical but decided to hear his aunt out. Can you tell me more about him and Sobo, grandmother? Questioned Naruto. Hikari just smiled and nodded. Several hours later. Several hours had passed of Hikari telling Naruto about his grandparents. Naruto had sat there just listening, however the carriage just suddenly stopped. What's going on? Questioned Hikari. Naruto stood up and ripped Aga off his back and opened the door of the carriage just in time to see a bandit charging towards him. Just as the bandit got to the open door, Naruto kicked him in the chin, knocking the bandit back. Naruto turned to Hikari. Stay here and don't open the doors, said Naruto, jumping out of the carriage, closing the door before he kicked the bandit that he had pinned beneath his foot in the head, making his head snap violently to the side. Naruto saw that all around him the ninja were fighting many bandits. Naruto ran over Enko, gathering chakra in Aga's blade before bringing it out to the side, then above his head, and with both hands swung the blade down. Yatsuga Tensho, Moon Fang Heaven Piercer, called Naruto, launching out a red and black shockwave of chakra towards the three bandits in front of Enko, two of whom were caught in the attack. Naruto then jumped and landed back to back with Enko. Nice going, Naruto, said Enko with a grin, holding a pair of kunai reverse grip. I aim to please sensei, said Naruto with a grin. Oh, we might have to test that sometime, Naru-kun tilde, said Enko, stretching out his name with a purr. Oh, anytime you want, Ko-chan, said Naruto with a smirk. Just then bandits decided to charge at the two ninja. Naruto rolled his eyes and flipped his katana so his blade was facing down before stabbing the blade into the ground, making the shadows of Enko and Naruto shoot out of the ground like blades that impaled 20 of the bandits coming at them, making them all drop to the ground dead. Naruto then turned back to Enko only for an arrow to sail past his head. You missed one, said Makari with a smirk, looking at Naruto. Naruto walked back to the carriage that he had been in with Hikari only to see one of the doors just open. Naruto's blood ran cold as his Sharingan flared and he ran to the carriage and ripped the door open to find to his horror his aunt was gone. Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated on his sensor abilities, searching out for his aunt. Ka-chan, called the red-headed boy, son of their client, walking up to the carriage. I'm sorry, she was taken during the fight, said Naruto as the boy approached. You have to find her, said the boy, looking terrified at Naruto. I know, Itoko cousin, said Naruto, whispering the last word before taking off in the direction he found his aunt's chakra signature. Naruto, called Makari as she and Kalina jumped after the blonde as he ran into the forest, both noting the shocked look on the face of their client's child. The two girls followed after the now sprinting blonde. Naruto, wait up, called Kalina as she and Makari tried to catch up to the blonde, who after a few moments came to a screeching halt in the trees, and just as Makari and Kalina got close they heard their friend and teammate let out an animalistic growl. We know you have the Shodai Uzukage's amulet, Hikari, give it to us and you'll get back to your family alive and in one piece, said one of two men in front of Hikari. Both men bore crossed Kurigakure headbands indicating their status as missing nin from Kiri. Both girls noted Naruto griping a necklace they hadn't seen before that Naruto wore. Just as Naruto reached for his swords he felt a hand on his wrist. He looked to the side to see Kalina, who shook her head and pointed back to Makari, who had pulled out a bow and notched two arrows and was pointing them towards the two missing nin. Naruto started flipping through Anbu hand seals that had been taught to all three so they could silently communicate. I'll go around to there in case the arrows are deflected and so we can still get the drop on them, signed Naruto, getting a nod from Kalina and Makari. Naruto then jumped to where he was pointing, jumping from tree to tree avoiding being seen. Kalina then jumped around the clearing away from Makari, so if Makari didn't both missing nin with the arrows, she and Naruto could drop in and get the two nin. Once the two genin were in position, Makari let her arrows fly free. The two arrows flew through the air straight towards the two missing nin. Naruto, Kalina and Hikari watched as the arrows flew towards the missing nin, only for them to turn as the arrows got close and were both deflected by Kanai. We got company, said one of the missing nin, looking around the clearing looking for the source of the arrows, only for Naruto and Kalina to jump out of the trees. Oni Sagan, Kuchio's demon restriction, summon, called Kalina as she landed on the ground with her hands on the ground as a whole ope. Ned up in the ground and a clawed hand reached out and pulled itself out of the hole, and out crawled Zuexin, who looked to Kalina for his orders. The red head is our client, these two are our enemies, said Naruto to the demon, who looked over to the blonde to see black markings wrapping around his SK. In a stick figure-like creature coming out of his shadow. Zuexin then looked to his mistress, who nodded to her demon, whose claws snapped out and glared at the two missing nin. Oh, what do we have here? A Jigoku clan member and an Uchiha. Not many of you left, Blondie. I wonder what Konoha would pay for your return, or Kumo for your capture, said one of the two kidnappers. That's it, growled Naruto, pulling out his second sword before throwing it up into the air, where what looked like an explosive tag went off, and out of the katana the other 100 rained down, sticking in the ground, in trees, and in rocks all around the clearing. Naruto, Kalina, Hikari and the two kidnappers were in. Once all of the blades landed, Naruto stabbed Eiga into the ground. Taint my blades with the shadows of the underworld, Eiga, roared Naruto, and like that his shadow spasmed and shot out, reaching all 100 katanas around the clearing before crawling up the blades and leaving them identical to Eiga. You kidnap my client, threaten her, then you threaten my teammate, you two are gone, growled Naruto as he shot forwards, grabbing one of his other blades. As he shot forwards, the two missing nin sneered at Naruto and each went to pull a blade out of the ground, only for both of their hands to get cut when they tried to touch the blades. What the hell? Questioned one of the two nin, just as Naruto jumped into the air above the two nin, holding both his blades in a backhanded grip as he fell toward the two nin. The two former Kiri nin jumped to the side to avoid him. However, Naruto quickly Kawarimi-ed with a katana stuck in the ground near where one of the two nin landed, and with one single swift motion the blonde spun and sliced an inch deep into the nin's back. Brother, called the other nin as the one Naruto cut fell to the ground. You forget he's not alone, came the voice of Zuexin from above the second brother, as the demon came down, slashing his front with the large claws the demon possessed. Naruto flipped over himself and slammed his foot into the back of the slashed ex-Kiri nin, who was trying to push himself to his knees, only to be forced to the ground as Naruto's foot was planted firmly in his back. The Kiri nin himself decided to Kawarimi with one of Naruto's swords, landing nearby his brother. We need to get out of here, said the one Naruto had beaten, getting a nod from the other. This is not over, Hikari, we will get what we came for, said the brother just as the two of them vanished in TW. In swirls of water. Naruto glared at where they were for a minute longer before he looked away and the katanas that had been sealed returned to their normal appearance. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, called Naruto creating a clone to collect the katanas and reseal them. He quickly then rushed over to Hikari who was sitting calmly on a rock. Are you okay, Hikari Oba? Questioned Naruto as he came to a halt in front of his aunt who nodded to him. Yes Naruto, I'm fine. It's really lucky I did give you that necklace earlier, said Hikari. What necklace? Questioned Kalina stepping up to the two of them. This one, said Naruto pulling the gemstone out of his shirt and showing it to his friend. And why are you calling our client Oba? Questioned Makari dropping from the trees beside them. I'm his aunt, said Hikari completely trusting the two girls in the clearing. If Naruto trusted them, which she could see he did, then so did she. Both girls' eyes widened at the statement. So what's so important about the necklace? Questioned Kalina filing away the information about Naruto's aunt for later. It belonged to the Shodai Uzukage, and is believed to have increased his control of Sweden, Raiden and Futon to levels never seen before, but it has never fully been concluded what the gem did if anything, said Hikari. Well, we should really get back, said Naruto getting a nod from his teammates and aunt. Naruto knelt down in front of his aunt. This way we'll be back quicker, said Naruto spotting the confused look on Hikari's face. She then nodded and hopped onto Naruto's back, and with that the three ninjas set on their way back to the convoy. Once the four people made it back to the convoy, Hikari hopped off Naruto's back only to be snatched into a hug by her husband and son. Alright people, as touching as this is, we need to move just so we don't get ambushed, said Enko getting a nod from the ninja and an okay from the clients. With that the two male clients walked back towards their carts while Hikari walked to her carriage with Naruto following behind her. Once Hikari and Naruto were in the woman's carriage and the two men were atop the carts, the convoy once more set off. Several hours later. The convoy had stopped for the night, everyone having set up their tents. Everyone sat around the fire as the sun began to fall below the horizon. Well, all bar Naruto, who was sitting on top of a branch of a nearby tree, one of his legs hanging lazily off the side as he watched OUT for threats. Naruto pulled out a scroll from his pocket. Unfurling it on his lap, it revealed a sealing matrix. Naruto put his hand over before channeling chakra into the Fuinjutsu matrix. His guitar appeared from the matrix. Everyone who sat around the fire turned to Naruto when they heard something being unsealed. Anko, Kurenai, Tenten, Kalina and Makari just smiled when they saw his guitar. You can play the guitar, Naruto-kun? Questioned Hikari getting a nod from the blonde boy who then began to play. Good to be alive, Skillet. I don't own this either. When all you got are broken dreams. Just need a second chance. And everything you want to be gets taken from your hands. We hold on to each other. All we have is all we need. 'Cause one way or another, we always make it, you and me. This life could almost when you're trying to survive. It's good to be here with ya. And it's good to be alive. It's good to be alive. I was lost and I was gone. I was almost dead inside. You and me against the world. It's a beautiful night. It's good to be alive. 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 Driving down this highway, soaking up the sun. Got miles to go before we get home. And the journey's just begun. We hold on to each other. You are everything I need. You feel like forever. You're the second chance for me. This life could almost when you're trying to survive. It's good to be here with ya. And it's good to be alive. It's good to be alive. I was lost and I was gone. I was almost dead inside. You and me against the world. It's a beautiful night. It's good to be alive. It's beautiful night. Yeah, it's alright. It's good to be alive. This life could almost when you're trying to survive. It's good to be here with ya. It's good to be alive. 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 And it's good to be alive. It's good to be alive. I was lost and I was gone. I was almost dead inside. You and me against the world. It's a beautiful night. It's good to be alive. It's beautiful night. Yeah, it's all right. It's good to be alive, sung Naruto as the others just sat and listened. Once the blonde finished, his eyes were closed as he quickly sealed away his guitar once more. Naruto sat next to his aunt in the carriage. It had been a week since the first bandit attack where the pair of Kiri missing nin kidnapped Hikari, and since then there had been several more attacks by bandits, but that was all and they were handled very quickly. However, as the two Uzumaki sat in the sea Ariage, Naruto suddenly stood up just as the carriage came to a stop. The blonde opened the door as he pulled Aga off his back and stalked up to the front of the convoy. As he got the front, the blonde pushed Kiba to the side and walked in front of Kurenai's team, glaring as the two Kiri missing nin stood before him once more. Naruto, what are you do? Began Kurenai. These two are mine, growled Naruto, making the Jonin jump. She had never heard her friend speak like that. Before any arguments could be made, Naruto flicked Aga into the air above his head and quickly flipped through hand signs. Waroke number jutsu, sexy jutsu, called Naruto just as Aga fell back towards the now redhead's hand. Narumi glared at the two Kiri nin, her Sharingan flaring to life as Narumi flicked her hand to the side, letting a tessin slip out of the sleeve straight into her hand as Aga landed nicely in her opposite hand. Teammate watched in awe as a stick figure-like creature arose out of Narumi's shadow, and shadow-like markings wrapped around the girl's skin, that is until bandits began to attack the group and they had to defend themselves. Not you again, growled one of the Kiri nin. What the hell is with the henge? Questioned the other. Narumi chose not to speak as she and her shadow puppet charged forwards, the girl herself going after one of the nin while the shadow with its claw-like fingers went after the other. Narumi swung her katana down on her target only for him to bring up a kunai to block it. Futon Kazakiri no Jutsu, wind-style wind cutter jutsu, called Narumi, flicking her tessin sending a wave of wind towards the Kiri nin. Narumi was then forced to jump as the second Kiri nin jumped at her, however. While in the air, the second nin's own shadow launched up at him trying to impale him, however he jumped out of the was just in time. Getsuga Tensho, Moon Fang Heaven Piercer, called Narumi as she landed on the ground, flicking her katana down from overhead, letting out a large shockwave of blue sea Hakra. As the two Kiri nin jumped back to avoid being hit by the wave, a long shadow blade burst from between Narumi's feet, flying towards both men, hoping to hit either of them, but both of them jumped to the side. However, just when they felt they were safe from the shadows, the long shadow blade Ted more shorter shadow blades off the body of the main one. However, the Kiri nin did manage to maneuver in such a way that none of the hits were in lethal spots. Narumi once more flicked Aga up into the air and quickly did a short chain of one-handed hand signs. Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu, fire-style fireball jutsu, called Narumi, spitting out a large fireball that flew out towards the two Kiri nin, who jumped to the side to avoid the attack before flipping through their own hand signs. Sweden Tepidama, water-style gunshot, called one of the two ninja, sending a large ball of water in Narumi. Sweden Suiryuden no Jutsu, water-style water dragon jutsu, called the other ninja, launching a water dragon at Narumi. Raiden Jaibashi, lighting-style electromagnetic murder, called Narumi, sending two waves of electricity out from her hands that flew and hit both water techniques, making the water ball become unstable before bursting into a puddle of water, while the dragon absorbed the lighting as it flew at Narum. Ihu quickly Kawarimi Ed with a nearby log, letting the wood get destroyed. Narumi, while she had time, quickly bit her thumb, drawing blood before she ran the bloody digit along the summoning tattoo on her arm before slamming her hand on the ground, making a sealing matrix appear on the ground and Fr. The matrix poured a lot of smoke before it parted, revealing Laswara and Razor. Naru, too? Questioned the Razorback, looking strangely at Narumi. Yep, me under a henge look, I need a hand, said Narumi, getting a nod from the two Razorbacks. Narumi then jumped out from behind the tree, the two Kree Turish following her before glaring down the two Kiri nin. Narumi then spotted her fallen katana. She once more Kawarimi Ed with the splinters of the log from before, grabbing her blade and then swinging around and blocking a strike that was sent her way by one of the nin, as he pushed harder against Narumi's blade. The redhead let herself fall back into her shadow, which quickly flicked over to Laswara's shadow. Narumi slowly rose out of the shadow of her summon, blocking a strike directed towards the creature's head from the second nin. Razor from behind Narumi and Laswara jumped up and over he two of them swiping at the Kiri nin's face with his sharpened claws. The man was hit in the nose and barley over his eyes. The nin screamed in pain as he jumped back, covering his eye. "You little bastard!" roared the other nin, pulling out a kunai and charging at Narumi, who ran at the man before. Sliding under the man's wild kunai strike, slipping into the man's guard and going to slice at his face with her tessin, the man jumped back just far enough to get out of Narumi's fan's range. However, before the redhead could do anything else, she found herself being launched forward courtesy of a K in the back from Razor's victim. Narumi was pushed forwards, launched into a nearby tree. The redhead, however, flipped midair and landed feet first against the trunk of the tree. Kicking off the tree, Narumi flew forwards, landing in front of the unscathed Kiri nin. She attempted the slice at the man's neck with her folded up tessin keyword attempted. The man leaned back just in time to avoid the slice, and at the same time he kicked Narumi in the chin, knocking her up into the air, before the other nin jumped in and kicked Narumi backwards into a tree. Narumi's back hit the tree, making the girl's back arch in unnatural ways. Narumi fell down the tree, her head down, her hair cloaking her eyes in shadows. However, what nobody noticed until now was that under Narumi's shirt a glow was pulsing. As the two Kiri nin got closer to find out what it was, Narumi stood up, her hair still shadowing her and before the two Kiri nin could say anything, Narumi flashed Throgat hand signs. Kyofuden Hoppo Uenzu, gale-style northern winds, called Narumi, almost bringing her hands together into a clap, stopping just short as gale force winds followed her hands, slamming both Kiri nin together as the two men collided. Narumi then began flipping through hand signs once more. Rantan Sodana Kaminari, storm-style grand thunder, called Narumi, her left hand going up into the air, and before a comment could be made the girl's limb fell and pointed towards the two Kiri nin, and lighting shot from the sky Onan hit both of the men before more bolts followed the first. After about 5 bolts fell the sky, Narumi fell down unconscious, and a little over 5 bolts of lightning later both Kiri nin fell down dead. Some time later. Narumi groaned as she sat up. Looking around, she saw she was back in Hikari's carriage with her aunt sitting opposite her. "Oba-san?" questioned Naruto, surprising the woman who was reading a book. "Oh, Naruto-kun yo," began Hikari, interrupted by Narumi holding a hand up. "When I'm like this I go by Narumi, not Naruto," said Narumi, getting a raised eyebrow from Hikari. "Well, this is a solid transformation technique, so when I'm like this I am a girl and it feels weird to have people call me Naru. So I go by Narumi," said the girl, shocking Hikari. "And you can just transform from male to female at a whim?" questioned Hikari, getting a nod from Narumi. "Pretty much, yeah," said the nodding Narumi. "Doesn't it feel strange?" questioned Hikari. "Well, at first I will admit it was a bit strange, but that was several years ago now," said Narumi with a smile. "How long can you be like that?" questioned Hikari. "Well, I don't know, I think if I wanted it could be permanent. I mean, I've spent a week constantly like this to get used to being a girl when I first created the jutsu, and it can't be dispelled by normal means," said Narumi. "Why did you even create it?" asked Hikari. "I created it when I learned of the kunoichi and shinobi style split. I wanted to learn all I could from my clans," said Narumi with a soft smile. Hikari nodded at her now niece. The two sat in silence for a moment. The silence was broken by Hikari. "Is your hair always like that when you are like this?" questioned Hikari, not quite sure how to describe Narumi. The girl herself nodded as an answer to the question. Hikari looked at Narumi and, Ed. "Why, is there something wrong with my hair?" questioned Narumi, looking at her hair, pulling her ponytail over her shoulder. "Not wrong, that style just doesn't suit you," said Hikari, scratching her chin before it hit her and she snapped her fingers. "Come here, Narumi-chan, let me see if I can fix that hair," said Hikari, motioning for Narumi to sit on the floor of the carriage just in front of her. Narumi nodded and took a seat, as Hikari got to work. "You have such beautiful hair," said Hikari as she ran her hands through the blood-red hair of Narumi. "Thanks, I tried to make it like Ka-chan's hair," said Narumi as her eyes lulled shut while her aunt fiddled with her hair. Hikari and Narumi sat in silence as the older woman styled the younger's hair. After what felt like an hour because it was so relaxing for the young redhead, Hikari spoke up again. And finished, said the woman looking down at the hairstyle with a smile on her face. Narumi's charcoal black eyes uttered open lazily before a mirror came into her view. It's lovely Oba-san, said Narumi, turning her head to the side to get a look at her new hairstyle. Her hair was pulled into a loose-ish off-center bun at the back of her head. The bun was about ear-high on the right side of the girl's head. And to Narumi's surprise, holding the bun tight was a pair of Senbon needles. Narumi raised an eyebrow when she saw that. Hey, just because I don't want to be a kunoichi doesn't mean I don't know how to defend myself. San made damn sure of that, so I always have Senbon on me, so sue me, declared the woman. Narumi let out a giggle and smiled, shaking her head. The three Konoha teams were tree-hopping their way back to Konoha. They had been traveling for about an hour now away from the land of hot water. Anko, who was in the lead, stopped, making everyone else stop. What is it, Anko-sensei? Questioned Naruto, who stood just behind the woman, who held her arm out as a messenger hawk flew down and landed on the outstretched limb. Anko-chan? Questioned Kurenai, hopping up beside his friend who rolled up the scroll she had been reading. Alright, you lot, change of plans, said Anko, turning around facing the other two Jonin along with the 9 genin. What do you mean, youthful Anko-san? Questioned Guy. It seems Kakashi got his dumb in trouble. Hokage-sama said he and his team took a C-rank mission and Kakashi has requested backup. And given we're closest to Land of Waves, Hokage-sama has decided to send all of us to back up Kakashi, declared Anko, before Anko changed her direction of travel and the whole lot of them headed towards the ocean. Several hours later. The three teams had all just crossed the water into the Land of Waves. The genin, incapable of walking across by themselves, got a piggyback by a Naruto clone, and now all 12 ninja were on a misty shoreline with the sounds of a battle not too far off in the distance with a coup. Ignod Anko, followed by her team, then Kurenai and her team, followed finally by Guy's team, quickly took off towards the sounds. Within several moments all 12 ninja burst into a clearing just in time to see two people vanish in a swirl of leaves. Anko, Guy, Kurenai, you three are my backup? Questioned Kakashi, turning to face the three Jonin. Yes, but Hokage-sama has requested I take over leadership, said Anko, pulling out a scroll and lobbing it to Kakashi, who caught the scroll before promptly falling flat on his face. Anko raised an eyebrow before walking over to the down Jonin and checked for a pulse. It's chakra exhaustion, sensei, said Naruto before Anko even got to Kakashi. Okay, then you brats are in charge of carrying your sensei, said Anko, pointing to Kakashi's team, from which the two dark-haired, pale-skinned boys walked forwards and each took one of Kakashi's arms and threw it over their shoulders. Anko then turned to the client. Your house nearby? Questioned Anko. Yeah, just on the other side of town, said the man, nodding. Anko nodded to him and he began to lead them towards his home. It only took about 20 minutes to get to the man's home. Walking inside, they were greeted by a blue-haired woman introduced to the ninja as Tsunami. I'm sorry, Ninja-sans, but there is no way that we will be able to house you all, said Tsunami sheepishly. That's no problem, we only need for you to accommodate our comrade here, said Anko, gesturing to the unconscious Kakashi. The rest of us will stay in the woods nearby, said Anko, getting a nod from Tsunami, who led the two conscious males of Team 7 away to find a place for Kakashi. Once he was AFE, the rest of the ninja left the house for a while to set up their tents. Alright everyone, I think we need to set up a schedule for who's guarding Tazuna at the bridge, who's guarding Tsunami, and who's training, declared Anko. A most excellent idea, Anko-san, said Guy. Wait, you said protecting Tazuna, protecting Tsunami, and training. What about relaxing? Surely with all of this we'd need time to wind down. Questioned Sakura. Naruto, Kalina, Makari, Anko, Kurenai, and Tenten had to resist the urge to face palm. Girly, the relaxing is the guard duty, declared Anko, getting a shocked look from Sakura. Now I think to start with you will all spar, so we can see who needs the most work in the training, said Anko. Who's first? Questioned Kurenai. Well, let's start with I don't know, Kalina and Pinky, said Anko. What me? Questioned Sakura pointing to herself. Well, I don't see anyone else fitting that description, Pinky, taunted Kalina stepping forwards. Whoa girl, not so close to the camp, said Anko. Kalina nodded to her sensei before the whole group walked into a second nearby clearing, where Kalina and Sakura stepped forwards, Sakura with a confident look on her face while Kalina's features held a bored expression. You're going down now, Kalina, declared Sakura. Kalina simply yawned, looking down at her fingernails. All right, ready you two? Questioned Anko, looking between her student and Kakashi's, both of whom nodded. Okay then, begin, said Anko. Kalina stood still, arms crossed, partially leaning backwards. Sakura however charged forwards with her fist ed back. I'll end this in one punch, declared the pink-haired girl as she ran at Kalina, who simply moved to the side before slamming her knee into the pink-haired girl's gut, making her drop to the ground unconscious. Well, that was anticlimactic, said Anko, kicking the downed girl to try and rouse her, with no luck. Sai, who's next? Questioned Anko. I would like to see Naruto-kun's flames of youth clash with those of one of my students, said Guy. Alright, perhaps Naruto should face Mr. White-Eyed and brooding over there, said Anko, pointing to Guy's Hyuga student. There would be no point any match between me and Uzumaki-san, I would be fated to win, declared Neji arrogantly. Well then, Fate Boy, all the more point, declared Naruto, pushing off the tree he had been leaning on and walking to the center of the clearing. Neji walked up and stood opposite him. You're going to lose, declared Neji as his Byakugan flared to life. You keep telling yourself that, declared Naruto, pulling both his swords off his back, letting his own dojutsu flare to life. Alright, you two begin, called Anko. Neji launched from his position at Naruto, who stood there, and let shadows wrap around him, leaving black markings on his face, just as Neji drew close enough to throw a strike. A shadow claw lunged out of Naruto's shadow up at Neji, forcing the genin back. You all might want to stand back for this, declared Naruto, looking at the spectators, who all nodded and stepped back several meters before Naruto tossed his second katana up into he air. Neji, you have no idea what you have gotten yourself into, declared Naruto as he charged forwards, both hands on Eiga, channeling his chakra into the blade which he held low. In the air above them, Naruto's second katana exploded, sending the other blades raining down on the two ninja. As the first one hit the ground, Naruto swung Eiga up at Neji. Getsuga Tensho, Moon Fang Heaven Piercer, called Naruto, sending a shockwave of chakra out at Neji, who was launched back and into the air from the attack. As Neji sailed through the air, katanas rained down on the clearing, and unfortunately for Neji, flying backwards in the air, he was helpless as the blades rained down. However, he was lucky enough that only 7 fell down on him, all of them glancing off, cutting only at most half an inch deep before they fell to the ground. Unfortunately for Neji, Naruto wasn't done. The blonde charged forward. DS once more. Catching one of the falling blades in his free hand, Naruto leapt forward, spinning sideways, bringing his unnamed blade down on Neji, who had only just landed, slicing his chest about an inch deep from his shoulder to his hip, before spinning around and with Eiga giving the arrogant Hyuga a matching scar from his other shoulder to hip, leaving a X-shaped scar on the genin's chest as blood poured out of the wound. Alright, that's enough, said Anko, causing Naruto to stand down while Guy, Hinata, Lee and Tenten rushed to Neji's side. Naruto walked over to Neji before pulling out a scroll L from his back pocket and laying it on the ground. The blonde then unfurled it to reveal several sealing matrices. Naruto then pumped chakra into one, unsealing the contents, or at least part of them, as 2 pieces of paper now sat atop the sealing matrix. Naruto put the pieces of paper on his palms, or channeling a large burst of chakra to his palms, where the chakra formed a shell around his hands. The chakra after a moment turned a dull green. Naruto then knelt next to Neji before running his green glowing hands over the cuts on Neji. The genin watched in wonder as the cuts began to stitch themselves shut. I didn't know you knew medical ninjutsu, Naruto, said Kurenai. I'm using conversion seals to convert my normal chakra into medical chakra, declared Naruto as he finished healing Neji's wounds. Who's next? Questioned Anko. I want to fight Blondie, declared Sasuke stepping forwards. Anko looked over at Naruto, who rolled his eyes and nodded. Alright, you two ready? Questioned Anko, getting a nod from Naruto and a HN from Sasuke. Then go, ordered Anko. Taint my blades with the shadows of the underworld, Aga, called Naruto, stabbing his blade into the ground, his shadow shooting out and connecting to all of the other katanas in the clearing before engulfing them in shadows, after which the shadows fell away, revealing the blade had turned into Aga-like blades. Sasuke then went to grab one of the blades, only for his hand to phase through the hilt. What the hell? Questioned Sasuke, trying again only for the results to remain the same. Aga and the blades she taints only respond to me, declared Naruto with a grin as he ran forwards, picking up a second blade. Sasuke leapt back, pulling out a pair of kunai ready to block the strikes the blonde sent his way. However, to Sasuke's surprise, Naruto lobbed his second blade at Sasuke. The black-haired boy barely dodged out of the way before Naruto appeared where his thrown blade had been mid-swing. Sasuke ducked under the slice before flipping backwards as Naruto landed on the ground. Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu, Fire-style Fireball Jutsu, called Naruto the second his foot touched the foe. Rest floor, sending out a fireball that flew at Sasuke, whose eyes widened and once more was forced to jump out of the way. Suiden Teppadama, water-style gun shot, called Naruto, launching 3 high-pressure water shots at his kinsman. The black-haired Uchiha once more was forced to dodge an Atta CK from Naruto, who before he could blink was upon him with a pair of blades, both being brought down on his head. Sasuke quickly brought up his kunai to block the attacks, only for the Naruto in front of him to burst into smoke and the Uchiha to be punted through the air, courtesy of the real Naruto. Ho appeared behind Sasuke, who was now barely standing. Naruto had 2 swords in his hands. Naruto ran at Sasuke before slamming one of the blades into Sasuke, but not so it would cut, not yet anyway. The sword just stuck where Naruto placed it. Naruto quickly substituted with another blade before picking up another pair, which he charged forwards and placed on Sasuke, bringing the total up to 3. Naruto then in a flash doubled the total and made it 6 with another 3 well-placed blades, and this kept going until there was 15. Then he jumped back and with his original blade he slammed the katana blade down into the hilt of one of the many hilts on the blades, and it was at this point everyone realized the blades were arranged in such a way that when one was hit it would hit the next, which would hit the next, and so on until it looped around to the last one, hitting the first one and starting all over again. So for the next 20 seconds Sasuke looked like he was having a seizure. Then the blades lost their momentum and fell to the floor, and not a second later so did Sasuke. After more friendly spars, it was decided that the groups would consist of Sakura, Hinata and Kiba on permanent training. Shino, Sai and Lee would be the first group to guard Tazuna, Kalina, Tenten and Makari the first guarding Tsunami and Inari, while Naruto, Neji and Sasuke would be the first grow up training on rotation. The 3 conscious Jonin would follow one group, and the Jonin of the rotational training would cover the permanent training group until such a point that Kakashi was awakened well enough to take over. Anko chose to be the one in charge of Naruto, Sasuke and Neji. Guy had picked the trio with his prized genin, so he was with Shino, Sai and Lee, which left Kurenai with Kalina, Tenten and Makari. Not that she minded all that much. It was now time for the 2 teams to set off for their guard duty, leaving Anko, Naruto, Neji, Sasuke, Hinata, Kiba and Sakura standing in the clearing chosen for training. Naruto looked around idly, noting that Sasuke was glaring at him, brooding as was Sakura, but to his surprise it looked like Neji was deep in thought, but all of that was interrupted by Anko speaking up. Alright you lot, I got a rundown on your skills from your sensei, so I know what to be teaching you, said Anko before pointing to Sakura, Sasuke, Hinata and Kiba. You 4 are working on the tree climbing exercise, said Anko, walking over to a tree. But Anko sensei, we already know how to climb trees, stuttered Hinata. Well, with this exercise you will learn to adhere to trees with your chakra, said Anko, demonstrating by walking up a nearby tree, shocking Kiba, Sakura, Hinata and Sasuke. Once she was hanging by her feet from the lowest branch, she flicked 4 kunai at the 4 genin, hitting the ground just in front of their feet. Use those to mark your progress. I'm only going to give you this one tip: too much chakra and you will be blown off the tree, and too little and you won't stick, declared Anko, dropping from the tree, landing on her feet before walking over to the other 2 genin. What are those losers going to be doing? Snidely asked Sakura, getting a glare from Neji and Anko. Naruto just rolled his eyes. Actually, given these two have already mastered the tree climbing, Neji here gets to do the water walking while I work with Naruto, declared Anko. What? I am an elite, an Uchiha, I deserve private training, not being stuck with this peasant work, declared Sasuke proudly. I'm an Uchiha too, dumbass, and I have already mastered both the tree climbing and water walking, which is why Anko-sensei is working with me, said Naruto. What the Gaki said. Now get to work, Uchiha, or do I need to give you some motivation? Questioned Anko, glaring at Sasuke, letting a snake slither out of her sleeve for emphasis. Sasuke decided wisely to shut up and get started. Guy tells me you have been working on the water walking for a while now, so you know what to do, said Anko, turning to Neji, who nodded and walked to a nearby stream to get started. Sensei, I finished the exercise, can I take a break? Called out Sakura, who was sitting on the first branch of the tree, giggling happily to herself. Hell no, you get to run up and down that tree until you drop, declared Anko, getting a shocked look from the pink-haired genin before a kunai grazed her cheek. Get moving or else next time I won't miss, declared Anko, an evil look in her eyes, and with that Sakura got right back to running up and down the tree. Anko turned back to Naruto. Alright Gaki, what are you doing? I know your control is as good as it's going to get for now, so, said Anko, trailing off, getting the feeling Naruto got what she meant. If I can, would I be allowed to read the scrolls Hikari gave me? Questioned Naruto quietly, hoping that none of the other genin caught the conversation. Anko nodded to the blonde-haired genin, who walked over to a tree not being climbed and sat against it and unfurled the first scroll. Anko meanwhile jumped up into a nearby tree, sitting on a branch that gave her a clear view of all of the genin. She did enjoy watching Kiba and Sasuke both get blown of the trees, but most of the time her eyes were on her own student. Several hours later. The first day of training, guard duty passed without problems, and all the ninja, including a now upright and on crutches Akashi, were in the clearing they had claimed. While the Jonin discussed the matter at hand, the genin had split up into their own social circles. Sakura was lying on the ground in the middle of the clearing, having crashed the second she reached the clearing. Kiba, Shino and Hinata sat off to the side, occasionally glancing around. Sai sat against a tree with a book in his hand, drawing something. Sasuke was sitting against a tree, brooding, occasionally glaring at the back of Naruto, who stood with Makari, Kalina, Tenten, Lee and surprisingly Neji, who had been acting less arrogant since Naruto beat him so easily. Lee had asked to spar with Naruto only for the blonde to say it wasn't a good idea with the fact that they were on guard duty or training for the next few days, but had agreed once back in Konoha the two would spar. Alright brats, listen up, called Anko, making all of the genin turn to the woman, topping all conversations. New plan: tomorrow we split back up into regular teams and continue what we did today, but there will be a fourth thing happening until the objective is complete, said Anko. What objective, Anko? Questioned Tenten. Finding Gato's base of operations, said Anko. So which teams are doing what, Anko-sensei? Questioned Neji. Kurenai's team, you guys are training again. Guy's team, you guys got to Zuna guard duty. Kakashi's team is protecting Inari and Tsunami, and my team, we're looking for Gato, declared Anko. The next morning. Naruto, Anko, Kalina and Makari stood just outside their base camp, ready to get to work. So Anko-sensei, what's the plan? Questioned Naruto. First you make as many clones as you can, said Anko. Naruto nodded. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, called Naruto, creating several hundred clones who stood at the ready awaiting orders. Alright, here's the deal, we're all splitting into groups of 2. Naruto, you're with me. Makari, Kalina, you two can either go with a clone or each other, said Anko. Two said girls looked at each other before turning to Anko. Together, declared Kalina, getting a nod from Anko. Okay then, now everyone is to head out in different direction and search for Gato's base. If you find it, head back to base camp and wait there for the rest of us. If not, return anyway once the sun starts to set, declared Anko. She got a nod from her two female genin and clones of her male genin, who all scattered in groups of two. Naruto, who had watched the process, turned back to Anko only to see her gone. So which way are we going, Naruto? Tilda, whispered Anko, purring out his name before licking his ear as she wrapped her arms around him. Why are you asking me, sensei? From what I hear in the village, you go both ways, retorted Naruto, making the woman blush. Why don't you and I spend a night together so you can find out for yourself, returned Anko. Now it was Naruto's turn to go bright red. Seeing her student turn bright red, Anko relented and let go of Naruto. So which way? Asked Anko, looking at Naruto, who closed his eyes for a moment before they snapped open before pointing off in a seemingly random direction. Anko nodded and the two took off in that direction. Hashtag 5 minutes later hash. So you think he's a little why? Questioned Anko, looking down at was almost certainly Gato's hideout. Either that or just stupid, replied Naruto before activating his Sharingan. No barriers or anything, said Naruto, his eyes revealing no barriers around the compound that sat at the bottom of a clearing. The stupid part, all around the walls of the compound were trees that were all taller than the wall. So do we head back, or do we scout it out? Questioned Naruto, casting his gaze over to his sensei. Anko adopted a thoughtful expression. How many bandits do you sense inside? Questioned Anko. Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated. About 250 over 5 levels, said Naruto. Anko once more looked to be deep in thought before nodding to Naruto. Henge into a bandit, we'll drop in just to make sure there's nothing too dangerous, said Anko. Naruto nodded and flipped thought hand signs. Henge number jutsu, transformation jutsu, called Naruto and Anko at the same time, and the two were engulfed in clouds of smoke. Once the smoke cleared, the two looked like a pair of regular bandits. The duo tree hopped over the roof of the building, dropping down onto the roof of the building. Naruto read a vent guard off and the two disguised ninja climbed into the air vent. Crawling along inside the vent, Naruto, who was in the lead, had his sensing ability at its widest range. As the two started crawling downwards, they saw light flood the vent. Naruto crawled along the metal box they were in. Until he was above the vent. Naruto stopped for a moment. Why'd you stop? Questioned Anko quietly. Guards close by, whispered Naruto. Once he felt them leave the area, the disguised blonde kicked the vent, breaking it before dropping into the hallway. He quickly nodded to Anko, who dropped down aft. Him. However, the second Anko's feet touched the floor, she was engulfed in smoke and an alarm went off in the hallway. Naruto could feel the bandits coming back and he saw the smoke around Anko clear, revealing the woman herself. I'm sorry about this, Anko-chan, play along, said the disguised Naruto before he kneed Anko in the gut, making her double over in pain, clutching her stomach. Naruto then grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head into the ground. What's going on here? Questioned a voice from the end of a hallway. I caught this bitch breaking in through the vent, said Naruto, pulling Anko up by her hair. Good job. Boss man is gonna want to see you in. Said the man, nodding his head to Anko. Naruto nodded, pulling Anko up before pulling out a length of rope and tying her hands up before turning to the other bandit who was looking at him funny. What? Questioned Naruto. I haven't seen you round here before, said the man. Oh yeah, I'm new, name's Blaze, said Blaze. Oh right, well you probably don't know where bossman is, follow me, said the bandit. Naruto nodded and followed the bandit through the halls until they came to a large set of double doors. The bandit nodded to the doors. Naruto pushed them open before pushing Anko in. What is it? Screamed a midget in a tux behind a desk. Bossman, I found this chick breaking in through the vents, said Naruto, pointing to Anko. Oh, good job my friend, please come in, said the man before he nodded to two men beside him who came forwards and took Anko by the arms. She looked scared as the two men took her away. So what's gonna happen to her? Questioned Naruto before Anko had left the room. She'll be tortured for whatever she knows, then broken in and sold off, said Gato nonchalantly. Naruto nodded as Anko was taken out of the room. Anko sat on the ground, her arms chained to a wall above her head. She wasn't sure how long it had been since her capture, but they had sent in their best interrogator who could do nothing to make Anko talk. However, she was having a problem escaping as she couldn't mold her chakra, at least not sin. She had been put in the shackles. Suddenly the door opened and a man stepped in. Anko had to stop her plotting as she looked up at the man who closed the door behind him. Naruto? Questioned the purple-haired Jonin, looking up at the man who simply nodded. What's going on, Naruto? Questioned Anko. Naruto walked forwards as he reached for Anko's shackles. Okay, so there's lots of bandits around. Gato is just as why as we thought, but that's kind of justified, said Naruto, interrupted by Anko. Why is that? Questioned Anko. This building is a former Uzumaki political embassy, and as such it has many defenses against ninja, hence why your henge was dispelled while mine wasn't, as I am Uzumaki, said Naruto. Is that why I can't mold my chakra? These shackles are chakra suppressants? Questioned the Jonin sensei, getting a nod from her student, who managed to break said shackles. Anko rubbed her somewhat bruised wrists before turning to her student. So what's the plan? Questioned Anko. Well, unfortunately you're limited to taijutsu and bukijutsu, as anything you use that needs chakra your chakra will scramble, making it fail, said Naruto, getting a nod from Anko. So I'll get up and attack Gato, and once you hear shit start to go down, that's your cue to break out and start wasting these goons, declared Naruto. Anko nodded. It sounded like a sound plan. Naruto stood and walked out the door, still under his henge, and walked over to the guard and held out the key. To Anko's cell. The guard went to take them, only for Naruto to slice the man's throat with Aga. Before the second guard could so much as move, a stick figure-like construct shot out of Naruto's shadow, lunging forwards and impaling the man. Once the man stopped moving, the shadow dissipated and the body fell to the ground. Before the body had even touched the ground, Naruto was already past it and moving upstairs to the first floor. As Naruto turned the corner to head up the stairs, he turned into a hallway with 10 bandits all standing somewhere along the hall. Naruto dropped his henge, cloaking himself in a cloud of smoke, drawing the attention of the bandits in the hall. They began to run at Naruto, who stabbed the blade of Aga into the ground before pumping a huge amount of chakra into it. Deck the halls with shadows and bring forth a demon, chanted Naruto as shadows shot out of the blade, enveloping the walls, floor and ceiling in shadows. The 10 bandits just stopped dead in their tracks when the entire hall was covered in shadows, and like that, spikes of shadow jumped off the wall, impaling all of the bandits. Within 5 minutes, Naruto was once more in front of Gato's office, having had no other major incidents since the one of the first floor. Naruto paused for a moment, letting his Sharingan flare to life in his eyes. Naruto then kicked the door open, surprising Gato. Who the hell are you and what are you? Ordered Gato, only to stop as Naruto dashed forwards and held his blade to the midget businessman's throat. Now Gato, be a good little bastard and fill out the forms to sign your company over to me, declared Naruto, glaring at Gato, who squeaked and nodded, pulling the forms out of his desk. I need a name, stuttered Gato. No, you don't, just fill out the stuff you need to, I'll fill out the rest later, ordered Naruto. Gato nodded and filled out the form before handing it to Naruto, who took it and slipped it into his trench coat pocket. Now be a good little piggy and stand up, said Naruto, using the tip of his blade to ease Gato out of his chair. Now you're going to open your safe, declared Naruto. Gato would have argued, but the sword was jabbed lightly into him, making him nod and move over to his safe, where he quickly spun the dial through the right combination before the door swung open, revealing a large amount of cash, gold and other things including scrolls. Naruto noted out of the corner of his eye Gato was quietly moving towards the door. Oh, you've outlived your usefulness, Gato, said Naruto, turning around to the man who stopped dead when he heard Naruto speaking to him. Naruto bit his thumb before running the bloody digit along his arm before slamming the hand into the ground. Kuchio's no jutsu, summoning jutsu, called Naruto as his hand touched the ground, causing a large fuinjutsu matrix to spread out from his hand before smoke poured out. Once the smoke cleared, a bear-like creature with black fur and white plates with red tribal lines covering them and orange eyes, over this creature had what looked like stones embedded in its skin all over with several larger spikes on either side of the spine. "Ah, Naruto, I haven't seen you since our introduction," spoke the creature. "Yes, I know, and I'm sorry it has taken so long for Met to summon you, Renga, but right now I just need some chaos after that shit stain is wiped from the face of the earth," said Naruto, pointing to Gato. Renga looked at Naruto, then to Gato before once more looking at Naruto and nodding. "Chaos? This is my kind of party," declared Renga before he jumped forward, slashing at the maining him before he could even scream. Renga then busted through the doors and left to cause some chaos. Naruto meanwhile pulled out a sealing scroll to seal everything into. #with Anko hash. Anko had been sitting on the cell floor for about 5 minutes now and had yet to hear any of the chaos Naruto promised, but she refused to go against the plan, especially with the seals in the area with her chakra. "Ow, what the hell is that thing?" screamed a voice from somewhere, and Anko smirked. That was the K. The purple-haired woman stood up, waiting another moment or two before ripping the door open and running out of her cell and up the stairs and out into the yard. What she saw was not what she had been expecting. In the yard was a large black bear-like creature swatting all of the bandits like they were flies. "Well, that's cool, I guess," muttered Anko before she pulled out a pair of kunai and rushed in and joined the creature attacking the bandits. After a few minutes, Naruto appeared and joined his summon and Anko in attacking all of the bandits. #flashback end hash. "And we'd all of the bandits on the way out," said Naruto. "Why the hell didn't you wait for us?" questioned an angry Kalina. "Because it was at first a scouting mission until Anko's henge got dispelled, then it turned into an assault," declared Naruto. "Well, good work, you two. Someone needs to go and tell Tazuna that Gato's dead," said Kakashi, watching as Naruto's clothes became soaked more and likely from sweetened chakra to get the blood out. "I'll do it," said Naruto as the blood ran out of his clothes and off his person before he flared Kaden chakra to dry the clothes. "I'll come with you," declared Anko, whose bloody clothes had vanished, replaced with a clean set, but it was obvious she hadn't used the same trick Naruto did with the blood still on her person. "Not with that much blood on you, you won't," declared Naruto. Anko walked over to a nearby lake and began washing the blood off while Naruto leaned on a tree. #20 later. Tazuna's house hash. Naruto knocked on the door with Anko standing behind him. They both heard shuffling from behind the door. "Oh, Shinobi-san, please come in," said Tsunami as she saw it was Naruto and Anko. "What can we do for you?" asked Tsunami, motioning for the two ninja to sit at the table where Tazuna sat. "Nothing, we just came to talk," said Naruto, remaining standing, not planning on staying long. "What is it, kid?" questioned Tazuna. "Gato's dead," declared Naruto, shocking both Tazuna and Tsunami. What did you say?" questioned Tazuna. "Gato is dead. No longer on this mortal coil, pushing up daisies, kaput," said Naruto. "Inari, come down here," called Tsunami. Several minutes later, said boy appeared in the room only to see Naruto and Anko and then get mad. "What are you two doing here? Why don't you just go back to your cushy lives in your village miles away from the problems of our village?" growled the boy. Naruto glared at the boy. "Inari," scaled Tsunami, but it was too late. Naruto stood up abruptly and walked out of the house. "Just so you know, brat, we came to tell you all that Gato is dead," declared Anko, making Inari's eyes go wide before Anko walled out of the house. Anko followed Naruto as he ran off into the forest. Anko jumped up into the trees as Naruto stopped in a clearing. "Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu, fire-style fireball jutsu," yelled Naruto, spewing forth a fireball towards a tree. Kyofuden Hoppo Uenzu, gale-style northern winds, roared Naruto, pushing his hands out as wide as they could go before slamming his hands together, making gale force winds swing around from his hands, slamming the trees together. Rantan Reza Sakasu, storm-style laser circus, screamed Naruto, a halo of light forming around his clasped together hands before about 6 bolts of lightning shot out of the halo towards yet another tree, making it explode into a cloud of splinters. Naruto then yanked Aga off his back before charging forwards and slicing through a tree trunk before shadows shot out of the blade, making the tree shatter into splinters. Gaahhhhhhhhhhhh, screamed Naruto, dropping to his knees and his sword screaming up into the sky. Anko, seeing her student in trauma, dropped from the tree before walking over to her downed student. Naruto-kun, said Anko as she knelt down beside him. He turned to face her. Anko-sen, said Naruto, interrupted by the woman pulling him into her chest in a hug. Naruto's eyes began to water. It's just so, spoke Naruto. I know, Naruto, I know, said Anko, patting Naruto's back, and like that the floodgates broke and Naruto began crying his eyes out on Anko's shoulder. Anko just let Naruto cry silently, condemning the village for hurting such a kind soul. After a few moments Naruto stopped crying, but Anko still held him to her in a hug. After a moment though, Naruto's arms went slack and Anko looked down at the boy who had apparently fallen asleep in her embrace. Deciding against going back to camp carrying and asleep Naruto, Anko created a clone to let the other Jonin know what she was doing as she shuffled herself over to a tree and let her eyes drift shut as she hugged Naruto. Naruto awoke from one of the most peaceful nights of sleep he'd had in months. As his eyes fluttered open and he looked down, he realized why. Naruto saw a pair of slender arms wrapped around his torso. Turning just so Naruto saw the still sleeping face of his sensei, Naruto just turned back and face forwards as a small smile spread across his face. Thank you, Anko-chan, whispered Naruto, leaning back into the purple-haired woman's embrace before his honed sensor skills picked up on a large chakra signature nearby, and not one he knew. Naruto sighed and created a clone which he quickly substituted with before walking away to find the signature. Naruto slipped through the forest stealthily towards the signature. When he got to just outside the clearing, the signature was within. He could see a girl in the clearing picking herbs. Quickly deciding that a stealthy approach was better, Naruto quickly moved backwards enough that when he used his jutsu it wouldn't alert the girl. Waroke no jutsu, sexy jutsu, whispered Naruto, transforming into Narumi. After removing her headband, Narumi walked into the clearing. Oh hello, said Narumi, faking surprise upon seeing the person in the clearing. Oh hello, said the girl, turning around. I'm Narumi, what's your name? Said Narumi with a soft smile. I'm Haku, declared Haku, watching Narumi carefully. What are you doing out here so early? Questioned Narumi. Oh, I'm just picking some herbs to help my friend, he was attacked by some of Gado's goons recently, said Haku, picking a plant and putting it in her basket. Would you like a hand? Questioned Narumi. Haku turned to face the girl for a moment. If it's not too much trouble, said Haku with a kind smile. Narumi nodded and began picking the same herb she saw in Haku's basket. So where are you from, Haku-san? Questioned Narumi, looking over at Haku. I was born in the land of water, but my parents died when I was young, but my friend helped me and we left the land of water together, said Haku with a soft smile. So this friend of yours, what's he like? Questioned Narumi, not letting Haku return the question. He's a bit rough to everyone, but he's also kind at the same time. I see him as the father I never really had. He just wants what's best for everyone, even if the way he goes about it isn't the best way, said Haku. He sounds like a kind man, said Narumi. Yeah, he is, declared Haku. So why is he working for Gado? Questioned Narumi. Oh, that's because Gado promised us protection from Kiri Hunter Nin, said Haku nonchalantly, until a second later when she realized what she said before her head sna. Pped towards Narumi, who was gone, replaced with a pile of the herbs she'd been picking. Make sure Zabuza gets better, Haku-san, came the disembodied voice of Narumi. Haku quickly looked around before grabbing the herbs from the pile and putting them in her basket and walking out of the clearing. Narumi meanwhile had left the clearing and undone her transformation, returning to Naruto, and Naruto had returned to the clearing with Anko in it only to find the woman squeezing his clone tightly and his clone asleep. Naruto once more substituted with his clone and dispelled the clone before it cool. Wake up, causing Naruto to become sleepy. Letting his eyes flutter closed, Naruto once more fell back asleep in the arms of Anko. Several hours later. Anko woke up feeling something pressed against her chest. She was about to slap the thing, but just before she did that she realized what it was in. Opening her eyes to make sure, she saw that it was in fact Naruto, who she was hugging close to her chest. Images of the previous night sprung to the forefront of her mind. I've never seen him look so vulnerable, thought Anko, looking down at the sleeping face of her blonde student and friend. Never again, declared Anko, planting a gentle kiss on Naruto's forehead. Oh, Anko-sensei, morning, sleepily spoke Naruto, his eyes fluttering open. Morning yourself, sleepyhead, said Anko with a smirk on her face. Anko-sensei, about last night, began Naruto. Anko snapped out of her teasing mood. Thank you, Anko, said Naruto, hugging the woman. No problem, Naruto, we're friends, said Anko, hugging the boy with a smile on her face. After a minute or two, Naruto and Anko parted and just smiled at each other. Anko-chan, I know this might seem weird, but when we get back home, would you like to go out for dango or something? Questioned Naruto, nervously scratching the back of his head. Naruto Uzumaki Uchiha, are you asking me out on a date? Questioned Anko with a grin on her face. Naruto just looked down shyly and nodded, scared of her response. Naruto, look at me, said Anko, looking down at the nervous boy. Naruto-kun, said Anko. Still Naruto didn't look up. Anko pushed Naruto's head up with her finger, forcing the now terrified boy to look at her. Naruto-kun, I'm not saying no, but do you really want to date me? I'm twice your age. Questioned Anko. Yes, Anko-chan, you should know age means nothing to me, said Naruto with a smile. You have yourself a date, Naruto, said Anko with a grin, making Naruto's face split into a huge grin and hug the woman. The two stayed in their embrace for several moments, just enjoying the contact, but after a moment the two broke the contact. I suppose we should head back, said Naruto as he pulled back from Anko with a sad look on his face. Yeah, I guess so, said Anko before both of them stood up. Both of them began to walk back to the clearing claimed by the ninja. However, on the way, Naruto his hand over Anko's before interlocking their fingers. Anko looked down to the blonde, then to their hands before rolling her eyes as a grin spread across her face. As the two approached the clearing, Anko smirked and decided to mess with Naruto a little bit. Anko leant down, and when before Naruto realized Anko had pressed her lips to his. When Naruto realized what was happening, he went rigid, and before he could enjoy the feeling, it was already over, and Anko was sauntering away with a sway in her hips and smirk on her face. Naruto numbly stumbled into the clearing after Anko, who smirked as she watched Naruto wander in. Are you two okay? Questioned Kalina, looking at the two. All good, right, Naruto? Declared Anko. Naruto just nodded numbly, still in shock about the kiss. Alright, Anko, today's your team's turn at the bridge, declared Kakashi, getting a nod from the woman. Alright guys, you heard him, get whatever you need and be ready to go, said Anko, getting a nod from Kalina and Makari. Naruto just stood there for a moment before shaking his head violently, snapping himself out of his daze. Several days later. It was Team 6's second day guarding Tazuna. Fortunately, the man had almost finished the bridge and there had not been any retaliations from any leftover Gato goons. Oh, look at this so inconspicuous mist hanging over the bridge, and bridge alone, yelled Naruto into the mist. Alright, I get it, brat, declared Zabuza as the mist began to clear, revealing the man and Haku masked and standing by his side. Nice to see you again, Haku, said Naruto, much to the girl's confusion. Haku then blinked and, Narumi-san? Questioned Haku, looking at the now red-haired girl. One and the same, said Naruto, dispelling his regular henge. So this is the kid that tricked you in the woods, Haku, said Zabuza looking at the blonde. I'm sorry, Zabuza-sama, said Haku. I thought it might interest you too to know Gato is dead, declared Naruto. What? Questioned Zabuza looking at Naruto. Why'd him? Sliced his head off, said Naruto pulling out a scroll and tossing it to Zabuza. What's this? Questioned Zabuza. Proof, declared Naruto as Zabuza opened the scroll revealing a sealing matrix. Zabuza pumped chakra into the matrix, unsealing W. Had appeared to be a human head. So why not just Haku when you had the chance, and why show me this? Questioned Zabuza. I have an offer for you, Zabuza. Haku, said Naruto. Zabuza raised his eyebrow at Naruto. Go on, said the swordsman. I can offer you a position in the Leaf, a Jonin most likely, and Chunin for Haku, said Naruto. What do you want in return? Asked Zabuza. Nothing, I just don't want to see two people such as yourselves waste your lives on the run. Haku is a kind soul who would make an excellent healer, while you, Zabuza, would make an addition to a fairly dismal number of swordsmen in Konoha, and a fair interrogator, or whatever path you choose. I have no judgment on what you do, said Naruto. Alright, Brad, but you got to prove to me that this will be worth it, said Zabuza taking the sword off his back. And how do you want to do this? Questioned Naruto, getting into a stance while reaching back ready to pull his blades off his back. Haku and you spar, you win we go with you, she wins we go off on our own, said Zabuza, handing his sword to Haku, who hefted the blade onto her shoulder. I like that idea, declared Naruto with a smirk. Naruto, are you sure about bringing them to Konoha? Questioned Anko, looking to her student. Naruto turned back to Anko, nodding before turning to face Haku. Before walking closer to the center of the bridge, the two met in the middle. Well, Naruto-san, are you ready? Questioned Haku, with Zabuza's large blade resting on her shoulder. Any time, Haku, said Naruto, pulling both blades off his back and holding them at his sides. As if an unknown signal went off between them, both sword wielders jumped back from each other. Haku hefted the sword off her shoulder with her right hand and held it to her left before dashing forwards at Naruto, slashing at him in an upwards arc, only to be blocked by the demonic blade of Aga. Naruto smirked at Haku as a stick figure burst forth from his shadow, slamming its claw-like fingers into Aku's blade, making the girl back up. Haku eyed the shadow stickman as shadows wrapped around Naruto's form before jumping out of the way as a spike of shadow launched from Naruto's shadows forwards at her. Haku, thinking she was in the clear, was about to attack Naruto, only for spikes of shadow to branch out of the main spoke and for one of those to pierce her side. That's an interesting sword, Naruto-san, said Haku, watching the blonde roll Aga in his hand. Oh, you have no idea, said Naruto, who jumped up into the air. Getsuga Tensho, Moon Fang Heaven Piercer, called Naruto, launching out a red and black shockwave of chakra towards Haku, who blocked the attack with her large cleaver, only for a light-coated blade to begin to slice into it. Off to the side, Zabuza's eyes widened at the boy and his attack. How did he do that? Special blade or not, lighting chakra shouldn't be able to cut through Kubikiribocho, thought Zabuza to himself watching the fight. That was unexpected, said Haku as she ran the sharp point of the blade across her skin, making the metal that had been cleaved away by Naruto's last attack return to normal. Haku then funneled her chakra into her own blade, making ice form on the edge of the blade. Oh, a Hyoten user. Hey, this could be very interesting, said Naruto, closing his eyes. How did you know? Questioned Haku, looking shocked at the blonde-haired boy whose eyes snapped open, revealing his three-tomoed Sharingan. For now, let's dance, declared Naruto with a borderline psychotic smirk.